Hello, EnderSword here again, this time with a replay from the Platinum League. I don't usually do anything from above gold, but this one was posted on teamliquid.net in the strategy forums, and as of the time I picked it up, no one had responded to Scott here for his request to analyze it, so I figured I'd do this little video and get it up for him, even though it's not quite in the league I usually do. So we'll obviously be focusing on Scott, the Protoss player here. His opponent is going to be TastiC, the Terran in the bottom left-hand corner. We are on Tal'Darim Altar for this, so there's usually a lot of opportunity for fast expansions, or at least 2 base play or more on a pretty big macro map here. The 3 things that we're going to be really focusing on today are, number 1, teching up and making sure that you have a plan while you're teching up during the game. You don't want to be spending resources on a tech path that you don't plan on using, and you want to make sure that you're not teching up prematurely to things and just spending a lot of money all over the place. The second thing that we're going to look at is upgrading well. Keeping up with your actual upgrades in terms of your attack and armor type upgrades, and making sure that you're getting your main tech upgrades, like, say, Storm, Blank, Charge, things like that, at appropriate times, not too early, not too soon, and just keeping them in line with your strategy in the game. The third thing that we're going to look at is adding production facilities at the right time, and the right time usually means when you're expecting a bump in your economy that will allow you to have resources to spend at those production facilities. So we see pretty standard play here by Scott so far. Obviously, we've got a gateway, the assimilator, pylons, all that normal stuff here. It does send a probe out a tiny bit early to get the cyber core going. You want those as crisp as possible so that you're not kind of waiting. It may seem like little things, but if you could get 2 more little mining paths done at the time, that's 10 more minerals, and it does just really add up over time. If you do that 10 times in the game, it can make a fair bit of difference. The scout pokes his way over to the Terran base, happened to scout that last, so he was already walled off by the time he got there. That's not great on this map, given that you know that Terran often will go for the fast expand that he is in fact going for. So knowing whether or not gas is taken and things like that is pretty important, but sometimes there's just nothing you can do about it. You do get walled off if you happen to go to that location last. Scott will do what is the appropriate response. He's going for a stalker. He did skip his first zealot and going right for stalker. You can send that stalker safely to the front of the Terran base and take a look around. Marauders, and particularly concussive shell, will not be out in time to stop you from just taking a look and then safely retreating away to your own base. So make sure that you're taking advantage not only of your probe scout, but following it up with that stalker scout to actually see what's going on. You're not going to get in the base or anything, but you can at least take a poke at the wall, take a poke at the front to see what's happening. He does end up coming up the ramp here and taking a peek at Scott's vision. Jukes back to get that little SCV, decides that's not the right thing to do, and takes a poke up front. You see a bunker here early on like that, particularly full of Marines. He could tell that there was no Marauder shot out of that bunker. It's pretty safe to think that there's likely a fast expand behind that, or else there's not a lot of reason here. He could be faking it, but probably not, and he can verify that shortly. So he does rightfully opt, yeah, I'm just going to put a Nexus down, and that's how I'll continue along. In his name, the tech path that he's chosen is 1 gateway and robo. He's getting an observer out so that he can take a look around. However, the robo facility ends up being silent now for a long period of time. He gets the robo out, but doesn't opt to do anything else with the robo facility. Instead, this early in the game, has already essentially changed his tech path to the Twilight Council. It is good to see the additional warp gateways go down, because you are about to add more economy, so you do want to be stepping up your production in accordance with that. But switching tech paths that quickly doesn't really make a lot of sense. So now this is just kind of a paperweight in the base that he's not actually planning on using. That's a really big investment to just sink and lose this early in the game. The Terran does have move-out potential here, does come up with a few Marines, and the Protoss is a bit indecisive here. Originally opting not to engage there, pulling back, but then stopping, engaging, pulling back, stopping, engaging, pulling back, and ultimately losing a lot more units than he really had to. He knew that these were about to come online. This one already was, but these two had the warp gate almost done as that attack was coming up. If you're going to not engage, just be decisive and pull back. Given the size and nature of that force, he's not going to just kill your nexus immediately, and there are no probes there at this point to defend, or that you actually had to protect or anything. Just immediately pull back into your base, get your reinforcements, and then crush it. It would have only taken the 5 Stalker, Zealot, and Sentry that he had, so the wasted force field and the loss of 2 or 3 of those units is just too much, given that he could have just pulled back and handled the entire thing probably without a loss of maybe 1 or 2. So be a little more decisive when you're deciding. Don't just go back and forth if there's really no need to. He's going for charge lot technology here. Again, the robotics facility kind of sitting like a paperweight, and production not really being used to its full potential. Gas is starting to accumulate here, but so he could be really adding on additional gateways, again in anticipation of this really getting up and running, and to use a little more of that gas. If you're going to get charge lots, often a good accompaniment to that is sentries, particularly mid-game like this, so that you can create a wall and really slam the charge lots against them, and they can't just kite back away from you. So it would make sense to add more facilities and get that unit out, actually use up some of the gas. Instead, he opts to go for another tech path and puts down a Templar Archives. The thing coming out is a Warp Prism, which again doesn't really make a lot of sense as a continuation at this point, but at least he's using the robo facility for something. The dual drop happens, and here we get a situation a lot of people run into. You get a drop in your mineral line, and you do ultimately know I can clean this up and everything like that, but there's a bit of an overreaction with the probes. He just throws them out, throws them to the other side of the map randomly, and they end up getting picked off over here, really far away from the rest of his army, and he doesn't have them selected. By the time he gets these selected and starts to run them away, it's way too late. And we've now lost over 31 workers in this game, a lot of them right there. If you're going to do one of those, and a lot of people do this, you just kind of panic and grab everything and you throw it somewhere. As you do that, hotkey them. Just put them in a control group. Put them in group 0 or group 8 or whatever you're not using at the time. And that way, when you throw them away, if they come under attack or if you have an opportunity to bring them back or need to move them somewhere else, then they're just on their own hotkey now. So say that was a Hellion attack, something that follows them around. If you're going to throw a couple groups in a couple different directions, hotkey them, and then you'll have more control over them. He's gone for the Storm technology, but there's no High Templars actually out on the map yet. So Storm is actually complete prior to getting any of the High Templar out, and the High Templar have to actually build up energy before the Storm is useful. Usually you want to invert that order, get some out on the map, and then start working on the technology so that they've actually built up some energy before you have to use them. And then you can usually afford a feedback or afford 2 storms or something of that nature. By getting that completely done before you ever make your first one, you're just wasting those resources way too prematurely, and you're just not building up that energy. We also see it's very, very late in the game. While this research is premature, this one's very late. Incredibly late in the game to be going for level 1 armor and no level 1 ground weapons yet. The Terran may only be 1-0 himself, but that's a very big advantage at this point when the Protoss could easily be on 2-2, particularly since he did opt to go for Twilight Council. Here he's finally adding extra gateways. With everything up and running, he's got tons of money, but this engagement happens. Everything just absolutely gets stormed. These High Templar, which didn't have enough time to build up energy, had they been made a long time ago, would have been at 200, and the storm and the EMP only would have knocked them down a little bit, about halfway. They still would have actually been able to storm, and he just gets caught completely without enough to defend himself. There weren't enough production facilities to keep this up. Again, I always say, imagine you take the money that you had at the end of the game and pretend that you had those units out on the map. Pretend that you were using your warp gates to full efficiency. Pretend that you had increased your production a little more. And that you had 8 more zealots out here, or 6 more zealots and 7 sentries out on the map. He probably could have completely won this fight, but it's just a matter of not keeping up with the production, not getting these out before the upgrade for them, not keeping up with these upgrades, and the fact that despite going in several different tech directions throughout the game, he never actually got that tech up and running. The tech he ultimately decided on was the High Templar, and there's 3 of them on the map, and they were new, so one EMP just took away all their energy. You also want to spread those out as much as possible. So just by delaying all those tech paths, there's nothing there. If he had just gone with the Robo facility to begin with and went to a couple of Colossus, he'd have 2 or 3 by now, and this army would look like an absolute joke. So it's a matter of picking what you want to do and just doing it, and only switching away from it if you want to transition out of it. So say he went to Colossus, and then there were some Vikings out and you wanted to switch to something else, then that's fine. If you felt that you've used your first tech enough and now you want to surprise them with another, that's fine. You have those transitions built in, but you don't want to be teching in one direction and just change for no apparent reason. And particularly since it kept his money down during the game. I'm sure at a lot of points Scott was thinking, oh, I don't have the money to add more gateways and so forth. But that's because he was adding Twilight Councils, and he was adding Templar Archives, and he was researching the Storm, and he was researching the Charge. So he was spending the money on other things that ultimately never really came into fruition. He never really, despite spending all this money, never got any use out of that in the game. So if that money had been funneled to something else, then again, playing the Minerals Left game, imagine that 200 and 200 more minerals were added, and 200 and 200 more gas were added, and this Templar Archives didn't exist. He would have thousands of resources left to just pump into a conventional gateway army that could have absolutely decimated this. So don't get caught going down paths that you don't plan on really using. And I think that's ultimately what leads to this defeat. It's something that can be quite easily fixed. This is a pretty good problem to have because it's a very easy problem to fix. It's not even a mechanical one. Just don't do it. So hope that is helpful, and thanks for